What's up, bro? We about to jump right into it. Rereading Getting Past No, Negotiating Away from Confrontation and Cooperation, written by William Ury. Alright. Prepare, prepare, prepare. I once asked Lord Corridon, a British diplomat, what was the most valuable lesson he had learned during his long and distinguished service in government. The most valuable lesson, he replied, I learned at the very start of my career when I was posted to the Middle East as an assistant to a local administrator. My superior would visit a different village each day dealing with disputes and other pressing matters. Once he arrived, pandemonium broke out as people beside him with requests and offered him coffee. It wouldn't cease until he left at sunset. He might easily have forgotten his objectives, but for one simple habit. Just before he entered the village in the morning, he would pull the Jeep off to the side of the road and ask, what is it that we want to leave this village tonight having achieved? He and I would answer the question. Then we would go into the village. When we left that evening, he would again pull the Jeep off the road and ask, now, did we get it? Did we achieve what we set out to do? That simple habit of mine was the most valuable lesson Corridon had ever learned. Before every meeting, prepare. After every meeting, assess your progress, adapt your strategy, and prepare again. The secret of effective negotiation is that simple. Prepare, prepare, and prepare. Most negotiations are won or lost even before the talks begins. Depending on the quality of the preparation, people who think they can wing it without preparing often find themselves sadly mistaken. Even if they reach agreement, they may miss opportunities for joint gain they might well have come across in preparing. There is no substitute for effective preparation. The more difficult the negotiation, the more intensive your preparation needs to be. When it comes to preparation, many people throw up their hands and say, but I can't afford the time to prepare. Preparation time tends to be the last thing on the to-do list. There always seems to be an urgent phone call to return, an important meeting to attend, or a household crisis to manage. The truth is that you can't afford not to prepare. Take the time, even if it means taking time out of the actual negotiation itself. Negotiations would be a lot more effective if people spent more of their limited time preparing and less in actual meetings. It is true that most of us operate under fairly severe time constraints. The preparation guidelines outlined below take that into account. They can be accomplished in as little as 15 minutes. If you want a rule of thumb, think about preparing a minute for every minute of interaction with the other side. How should you prepare? When you're embarking on a negotiation, just as on a voyage, the first thing you need is a good map. Okay? Mapping out the way to agreement. There are 5 important points along the way to a mutually satisfactory agreement. Interest, options for satisfying those interests, standards for resolving differences, fairly alternatives to negotiate, and proposals for agreement. Number 1, interest. Negotiation typically begins when one side's position comes into conflict with the other side's. In conventional bargaining, your position may be all you need to know in advance, but joint problem solving revolves around the interests that lie behind each side's positions. The distinction is critical. Your position is the concrete things you say you want, the dollars and cents, the terms and conditions. Your interests are the intangible motivations that lead you to take that position. Your needs, your desires, concerns, fears, and aspirations. In order to end up with an agreement that satisfies both sides, you need to begin by figuring out each side's interest. Figure out your interest. Unless you know where you want to go, you're unlikely to get there. In a negotiation with a difficult client who insists on sticking to the original fee for your services, despite the unforeseen additional work required, your position may be, I want a 30% increase in fees to reflect the additional work. Your interest in wanting the fee increase may be to preserve your profit, a margin, while keeping the client happy. You want to cover your interest by asking the simple question, why? Why do I want that? What problem am I trying to solve? It's important to rank your interests so that you don't make the all too common mistake of trading off an important interest for a less important one. If the relationship with the client promises to be a very profitable one, you may want to make that the number one priority. Your interest in realizing a profit on the immediate project may be the second interest, and the third may be avoiding setting a percentage of doing extra work without compensation. Figure out their interest. Negotiation is a two-way street. You usually can't satisfy your interest unless you also satisfy the other side's. It is therefore just as important to understand their interest as yours. Your difficult client may be concerned about sticking within an established budget and looking good to their bosses. I remember my Uncle Mel once coming to visit me at my Harvard Law School office when he returned to campus for his 25th reunion. At one point, he took me aside and said, "You know, Bill, it has taken me 25 years to unlearn what I've learned at Harvard Law School, because what I learned at Harvard Law School is that all that counts in life are the facts, who's right and who's wrong. It's taken me 25 years to learn that just as important as the facts, if not more important, are the people's perceptions of those facts. Unless you understand their perceptive, you're never going to be effective at making deals or settling disputes." The single most important skill in negotiation is the ability to put yourself in the other side's shoes. If you're trying to change their thinking, you need to begin by understanding what their thinking is. How can you learn about the other side's interest? Try the simple exercise of imagining from their point of view what they seem to care most about. Then ask yourself, do they often behave in a difficult fashion, or is it just a temporary aberration? What has been happening in their personal or professional lives that may be coloring their attitude towards you? Do they have a reputation for honesty and fair dealings? If you have time, you might talk to people who know them, their friends, their peers, their customers, and their employees. The more you can find out about the other side, the better chances of influencing them successfully. Number 2, options. The purpose of identifying each side's interest is to see if you can devise creative options to satisfy them. An option is a possible agreement or part of an agreement. Inventing options for mutual gain is the negotiator's single greatest opportunity. Effective negotiators do not just divide up a fixed pie. They first explore how to expand the pie. Excuse me. While it may not be possible to obtain your position, it is often possible to satisfy your interests. You may not succeed in obtaining the 30% fee increase, but you may invent an option that allows you to realize a profit on the project while keeping your client satisfied. Could you transfer some of the additional work required to your client's staff? Could you stretch out the project into the next fiscal year so the additional fees come out of the next year's budget? Could you take a cut in compensation this year for a specific commitment to signify future work? Could you show your client that this additional work will result in substantial savings, part of which could be used to pay for the additional work? A common mistake in negotiation is to dwell on a simple solution, your original position. By opening yourself up to consideration of a multitude of options, you may generate new possibilities, one of which might meet your interest while also satisfying the other side's. The biggest obstacle in the way of generating creative options is a little voice in the back of our heads that says, always saying, that won't work. Criticism and evaluation. While important functions interfere with your imagination, it is better to separate these two functions. Invent first, evaluate later. Suspend judgment for a few minutes and try to come up with as many ideas as possible. Include ideas that at first seem like wild ideas. Remembering that many of the best ideas in the world started out as wild ideas everyone disagreed with. After brainstorming a multitude of options, you can review them and evaluate how well satisfy your interest and the other side's too. Number 3, standards. Once you have expanded the pie, you need to think about how to divide it up. How will you jointly select an option with the other side when your interests are opposed? Your client wants to pay less for your work, you would like them to pay more. How do you resolve this issue? Perhaps the most common method is to use a contest of wills. Each side insists on its position, trying to get the other to give in. The problem is that nobody likes to give in. A contest of wills quickly becomes a conflict of egos. The person who eventually gives in remembers it and tries to even the score the next time, if there is a next time. Successful negotiators head off a contest of wills by turning the selection process into a joint search for a fair and mutually satisfied solution. They rely heavily on fair standards and independent of either side's will. An independent standard is a measuring stick that allows you to decide what is a fair solution. Common standards are market value, equal treatment, the law, or simply the way of the issues that has been resolved before. The great virtue of standards is that instead of one side giving in to the others on a particular point, both can defer to what seems fair. It is easier for your client to accept a standard like market rate than it is to pay a certain fee just because you say that's what you're charged. So think in advance about what standards you could appeal in your negotiation. Do your homework on market rates, scientific costs, technical measures, and precedents. Come armed to persuade. Come armed to persuade. Come armed to persuade. Alternatives. Number 4, alternatives. All too often, people go into a negotiation looking for agreement and examine their alternatives only if things go badly. This is a classic mistake. Knowing what your alternatives are can determine your success in satisfying your interest. The purpose of negotiation is not always to reach agreement, for agreement is only a means to an end, and that end is to satisfy your interest. The purpose of negotiation is to explore whether you can satisfy your interest better through an agreement than you could by pursuing your best alternatives to a negotiation agreement, which is BATNA. Your BATNA is your walkaway alternative. Its best course of action for satisfying your interest without the other's agreement. If you're negotiating with your boss over a raise, your BATNA might be to find a job with another firm. If you're negotiating with a salesperson, your BATNA might be to talk to the store manager, or if that fails, you might go into another store. If one nation is negotiating with another over unfair trade practices, its BATNA may be to appeal to the appropriate international tribunal. Usually, resorting to your alternative entails cost to you and to the relationship, which is why you are negotiating to develop a better solution. BATNA is the key to negotiating power. Your power depends less on whether you are bigger, stronger, more senior, or rich than the other person, than how good your BATNA is. If you have a valuable alternative, then you have leverage in the negotiation. The better your BATNA, the more power you have. Identify your BATNA. Your BATNA should be your measuring stick for evaluating any potential agreement. To identify your BATNA, you should consider 3 kinds of alternatives. First, what can you do all by yourself to pursue your interest? Your walkaway. Alternative may be to find another supplier. If you're a buyer or another customer, you're a seller. Second, what can you do directly to the other side to make them respect your interest? Your interactive alternative may be to go on strike or to go to war. Third, how can you bring a third party into the situation to further your interest? Your third party alternative may be to resort to mediation, arbitration, or court. After generating a set of possible alternatives, select the one that is most likely to satisfy your interest. Keep your BATNA in your pocket. When you're under heavy attack and feel panicky, you can pat your pocket and say to yourself, I'm okay if it doesn't go okay. Boost your BATNA. A good BATNA usually does not already exist. It needs to be developed. If your BATNA is not very strong, you should take steps to improve it. For instance, don't just identify your BATNA as seeking another job in the same industry. Go to the trouble of getting an actual job offer. If you're selling your house, don't stop showing it just because the one person has indicated. Go to the trouble of getting an actual job offer. If you are selling your house, don't stop showing it just because one person has indicated serious interest. Keep looking for another potential buyer. Or If your company is at risk of being taken over by a corporate raider, look for friendly buyers or consider borrowing money to take your company private. Excuse me. Decide if you should negotiate. Once you've formulated your BATNA, you should ask yourself, should I negotiate at all? Have you ever wondered why some people keep trying to negotiate with an abusive boss long after they should have left the job? Or why frustrated parents will continue to make deals with their rebellious teenagers? Each pact broken as quickly as the last. Habit, guilt, self-blame, and fear may all play a role, but often the central reason that the employee or parent have lost sight of their best alternatives, if they thought about it, they might well discover that there was a better way to satisfy their interest, and that didn't depend on having to negotiate with their enemies. Perhaps your BATNA is better than any agreement you could reach with the other side. Remember, too, that the negotiation process itself is not free of cost. It can take a lot of time and effort, in the course of which your other alternatives may vanish. Your decision to negotiate should therefore be a carefully considered one. Keep in mind that it is easy to overestimate how good your BATNA is. Many business executives listening to the advice of overconfident lawyers have escapaded negotiations and taken a dispute to court, only to find themselves on the path to financial ruin. In any lawsuit, strike, or war, one contender and often two discover that their BATNA wasn't as good as they imagined. Knowing in advance that your alternative is unattractive, out to make your work hard to reach an agreement. Identify the BATNA. Knowing the other side's BATNA can be just as important as knowing your own. It gives you an idea of the challenge you face. Developing an agreement, this is superior to the best alternative. It helps you avoid the dull mistakes of understanding how good it is and overestimating how good it is. Your BATNA may be weak, but the other side's BATNA may be weak too. Many salespeople and consultants are convinced their clients can just switch to the competition in a flash. They often fail to appreciate the true cost of changing vendors. An objective look at the client's BATNA can give them more confidence in a difficult negotiation. If the other side's BATNA is to use correspondence, you can prepare in advance to counter it. If your company is in danger from a corporation raider, for example, you can pass corporate bylaws that would render a hostile takeover more difficult. Think about how to neutralize the effect on you of the other side's considered actions. Number 5, proposals. Your work on interest and options opens up the problem for creative solutions. Your work on fair standards and alternatives helps you select an appropriate option to shape into a proposal for a possible agreement. To formulate a solid proposal, you want to select an option that satisfies your interests well, certainly better than your BATNA could. The option should also meet the other side's interests better than you think the BATNA could, and should be based, if possible, on fair standards. What distinguishes a proposal from a simple option and a commitment? A proposal is a possible agreement to which you are ready to say yes. Of course, there may be more than one possible agreement that meets all these criticals. Indeed, it is useful to have 3 proposals in mind. What do you aspire to do? Which is the question. Many of us tend to adopt rather modest goals, wishing to avoid failing. Unfortunately, low aspirations tend to be self-fulfilling. What you don't, surprisingly, those who begin with realistically high aspirations often end up with better agreements. How high is realistically? Realistic means within the bounds set by fairness and by the other side's best alternative. Aim high. So begin by asking yourself, what agreement do I aspire to? What would genuinely satisfy my interests and at the same time meet enough of the other side's basic concerns that there is at least a chance that they would agree? What would you be content with? Often you may not get everything you would like. It is therefore useful to ask yourself a second question. What agreement, perhaps far from perfect, would still satisfy my basic interests sufficiently that I would be reasonably content? Okay? What could you live with? Question. The third proposal should be based directly on your assessment of botany. What agreement would satisfy your interest only marginally better than my botany could? What agreement could I live with, but just barely? If you can, in the end, obtain an agreement at least as good as that, you should consider walking away from the table and resorting to your alternative. This proposal will function like a tripwire, reminding you that you are in danger of accepting an agreement worse from you than your botany. Think of these three proposals not as rigid positions, but as concrete illustrations of the kinds of outcomes that would satisfy your interest. You cannot know for certain that the other side will agree to your proposals, and you may learn something in the course of the negotiation that will enable you to come up with a solution that meets your interests, and theirs even better. Rehearse. Preparation is easier to do when you're talking it over with someone else. Others bringing new perspectives compel you to address points of difficult that you might otherwise avoid and offer your moral encouragement. So think about scheduling a preparation session with a colleague or friend. It has the added advantage of ensuring that you do prepare. In your session, consider rehearsing what you will say to the other side and how you will respond to what they say. After all, lawyers rehearse tough cases. Politicians rehearse tough media interviews. Executives rehearse tough presentations to stockholders. Why should you rehearse a tough negotiation? The best place to make mistakes is in rehearsing with a friend or colleague, not in negotiation for real. So ask your colleague to play the role of the other side for a few minutes and try out your powers of persuasion. Try out your powers of persuasion. Okay. Try out your powers of persuasion. Okay, so ask your colleagues to play the role of the other side for a few minutes and try out your powers of persuasion, focusing on interests, options, and standards. After you have finished, ask your colleague to tell you what worked and what didn't. What did it feel like to be on the receiving end of your words? What should you do differently? And then try it out again until you get it right. If you don't have a colleague or friend to rehearse with, try writing out what your plan is to say and rehearse by yourself. Excuse me. Anticipate what tactics the other side may try and think in advance of how best to respond. Having prepared in advance, you are less likely to be caught by surprise. Instead, you can say to yourself, I knew that was coming, and deliver your preparation response. That is the value of preparation. Preparing to navigate. Ideally, you would now conduct a negotiation in the same way that you have prepared. You would begin by exploring interest, trying to understand what each side is generously concerned about. Then you would discuss various options without commitment, seeing if you could genuinely satisfy both sides' interests. You would consider different standards of fairness for reconciling your differences. Finally, you would exchange the proposals back and forth in an effort to reach mutually satisfactory agreement that in any case is better for each side than resorting to your respective badness. In the world, however, your efforts to engage in joint problem solving run up against powerful reactions, hostile emotions, and rigid positions. Strong dissatisfactions and aggressive power plays. Your challenge is to change the game from face-to-face confrontation into side-by-side problem solving, turning your opponent into a negotiating partner. Now that you have a good map of where you want to go, you need to use the breakthrough strategy to navigate past the obstacles and stand by yourself. The next 5 chapters are intended to prepare you to navigate.